Welcome to Business Dive Extra, the show that focuses on business leaders and entrepreneurs. We've been hearing that data is a new oil for a while now. In this week's episode, we're talking to a man who is an expert in the field. It's an emerging area that our guest has been studying astutely for the past 20 years. He's an attorney at law who earned his first degree at the University of West Indies, UWI-Mona, before going on to earn his master's in IT and management at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. He is a top data protection officer in the country, leading the conversation on privacy. And he's an Ironman. That's right, he competed in the Atlanta staging of the competition last year. That's right, our guest today is Chuk Cameron, founder of Design Privacy, a consulting firm which helps clients comply with privacy laws and build trust with their customers. Chuk, welcome. We can do a little bit of an elbow bump, you know? Here you go. Great. Great to have you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here so much.
You know, Chuk, we met a long time ago, actually,
Yes.
in the days of Startup Jamaica, which was, I think, backed, or was it funded by, JN or Jamaica National?
And Quasi also funded by the government for the most
Okay.
part. I think Jane was providing the space. But yes, those were the days, sir,
Okay.
when all things were possible.
And, you're an attorney at law, and so you're also a serial entrepreneur, would you say?
I would call myself a serial entrepreneur while doing law, yes.
Okay. And what are you better known for, would you say, these days now? Instead of the flashback, the legal profession or, your business startups?
So I'm recognized as an attorney practicing in constitutional admin law, but I am now focused singularly on data protection. So I've actually, for the most part, walked away from the straight practice of law with a view to singularly helping entities comply with data protection laws.
Okay. Do you find a lot of, the younger attorneys in Jamaica kind of dabble almost in private equity or in entrepreneurism, or do they kind of, keep it separate and apart? Just in this kind of new normal now, and also where the world has been going.
I am seeing that younger attorneys are becoming more comfortable in the space and attempting to carve out a niche for themselves. There may still be a gap in terms of knowledge and experience, but I see them as risk-taking and seeing the opportunities and jumping into it. So I'm of the view that shows such as these really assist young attorneys and other young entrepreneurs in the space to adequately explore their endeavors.
And do you think, Chuck, is it the intellectual capacity chase, to go into, something broader than just the law practice, or is it about, making money as well, doing better for your family, or is it a mixture of the two?
So that sounds like a trick question, Sir Mark. For me, there's a Jamaican reality that we have to provide for ourselves and our families and those associated with us. So before we can get into ethereal intellectual pursuits, it's really about creating better opportunities for ourselves and our families and those around us.
Right. Okay. And and Chuck, listening to you, it sounds like you talk about Bitcoin sometimes or Ethereum and all those words, and so that's why I've always appreciated your intellect. But where did you get started? How did you get an appreciation for law?
Or technology and law. So, well, my interest in the law and technology came from a trip to Canada about 20 years ago when I visited a very good friend of mine, Chris Haddad. Back then, he was actually hosting websites. And while there, and he was hosting websites out of his basement at home, while there, Rogers' service went down.
Okay.
And his question to me was, as a young attorney, Chuck, what am I going to do? My internet service provider just went down, and I'm hosting all of these websites. What am I supposed to do when all of these companies I have relationship with these companies? At that time, 20 years ago, internet could be considered to be the Wild Wild West. Mm-hmm. And I quickly realized that this is the new space that we will be living in. and those would be basic questions that would have to be answered. And I further realized that that is something that I wanted to be part of the future and add value in taking us into that future. So I quickly focused on those opportunities from then. And I would want to say that's where my interest in technology and the law started from.
So that was a light bulb moment in the kind of tech space,
Correct.
which probably follows a data space.
Correct.
But for the legal, side, how did that kind of all come about in your career?
That's from the traditional roadmap that you're put on by your parents, or not even by your parents, but by it's a natural evolution. You are taught that you can either be a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. You are never told, no one ever tells you that.
And was that from your mom or your dad?
Well, the reality is I was never told that.
Okay.
It's just that those were the only options that you are aware of. So no one ever tells you that this is what you need to be or this is where you need to be looking. But it was a natural evolution for me, because I remember as a student going to prep school, I would be questioning the most basic things and be sent to the principal because of the basic questions that I'd be asking. So I always had a certain propensity.
Where'd you go to prep school?
Mona Prep.
Okay.
And where our motto proudly is, I serve.
Were you a big footballer?
No, and that was my parents' decision again. They wanted me to remain intellectually.
Okay.
But notwithstanding that, at that time, Mona was over a 10-year period dominated football.
Yes.
So by extension, I'd like to associate myself with it, and must have naturally gotten some skills by just growing up with those guys.
Yes. And you went on to Campion.
Yes, sir.
And Campion is known, very prestigious school, some of the best transcripts, that go off to colleges, whether it's overseas, local, anywhere you go. I mean, is that, tell us some about some of the shining experiences, some of the tough experiences, that built you into Chuk.
So that Campion was an interesting experience for me, because you really got, first coming out of Mona, at that time you had a lot of children from all over the world going to Mona Prep, because I had a lot of diplomats' children. Okay. So the concept of diversity and differences was commonplace for me. So going to Campion, it was more monotone. The diversity wasn't that rich, but it was still different. I was aware that what Campion represented did not necessarily represent what Jamaica looked like. But it was an opportunity for me to see where do I, Chuck Cameron, fit in the broader pool. So prep school is often most people usually sign in that very small pond. So the question for me was, so where do I fit in this bigger ecosystem? Our tertiary education in general in Jamaica, and this is my personal experience, wasn't necessarily very inspiring. So while Campion pushed for excellence, and that's what Campion, that is what defines Campion, excellence, it still remained on one track, where the option that I speak of, most of my friends are either lawyers, doctors, or bankers, or engineers. And the world is made up of much more than that.
Sometimes persons say, the network you build, makes you more successful than just the education. I mean, have you really kept in touch, or would you say the network you built at, whether it's your, high school level, your other education level, has made you successful, or, as Chuk, going forward with your tech endeavors, your legal practice? So,
as an attorney, the key to success as an attorney is only hard work and diligence. Okay. I initially worked with Crafton Miller, so he was my mentor, and it is only keeping your head screwed on and focused and hard work, and things naturally happened around that. However, as it relates to my many entrepreneurial endeavors, that is where one would more leverage your relationships or realize that you have relationships that you can benefit from. So for the greater part of my profession as an attorney, you just did your work and let the work speak for itself. But as I said, as an entrepreneur, that's where you must know people and interact with people if it is you're putting out yourself out there as someone that could solve problems and hope somebody is going to pay you to solve their problem.
And tell us a bit about your first name. I call you Chuk.
Right.
But does everybody call you Chuk? I mean, how do you say your first name fully?
So I say it's pronounced Chukwuemeka. That's more the African pronunciation as opposed to the English pronunciation. So growing up in prep school, I used to be called Chukwuemeka. But that's more the English phonetical pronunciation.
And what were some of your pet names growing up, whether it's in prep school, high school, anywhere?
Chucky or Chuk. I wasn't one to have those exotic pet names. It was Chuk or Chucky.
Okay. All right. But it was a very memorable name. And has that helped you? I mean, sometimes, businessmen, ladies always say, boy, having a memorable first name, last name, just having a catchy name tends to help them in their life.
It is a talking point and has served me well in court. And
How so?
So I actually started my litigation practice in the Court of Appeal. So when I get up before the Court of Appeal panel and you have to introduce yourself, is a talking point. So I had always have the opportunity to break the ice.
With your opponent or like a good laugh with the judge?
With the judges.
Okay.
No, man, you're not trying to break the ice with the opponents. No, you're not trying to break in the ice with the It's really with the judges. You're trying to start. You want to start your advocacy from the beginning, and if you can engage them in a conversation on any issue, that is where your advocacy starts. So I've always known how to pronounce my name and where it comes from. So that would often give me confidence in the starting of any presentation. So yes, I've seen it as an advantage that I've enjoyed.
Okay. And give us a couple of jokes. What's something a judge would say to you?
So 20 years down the road, they're no use to me and it's now taken for granted. The bigger joke, and those who know me would know that I have a very dry humor. So I'm not one who often tell jokes, although I have a very dry humor. But what is more often in issue of late is the relationship that I share with Queen's Counsel.
Okay.
And
are you a QC, Chuck? Or?
No, my wife is Queen's Counsel.
Okay, your wife is an attorney as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that is where people would find fodder to chew on.
Okay.
Especially when we appear in matters together.
You mean how is your dinner, breakfast table, all those type of things?
And correct.
Okay, all right. Well, it's good that you smile on that topic.
No, we use that to our advantage, and so it is only something that is enjoyed and is positive.
That's great, Chuck. And we take our first break on Business Live Extra. We're talking to Chuck Cameron, founder of Design Privacy. We'll hear all about the company when we return. Welcome back to Business Live Extra. We're talking to Chuck Cameron, founder of Design Privacy, a consulting firm that helps clients comply with privacy laws and build trust with customers. It currently has 8 staff but has rapid expansion plans. The environment is changing quickly as strict data protection laws like Europe's Gdpr come online. Companies can be fined up to 10 million euros at the lower level, or 2% of worldwide annual revenue. The upper level is twice that at 20 million euros or 4% of the worldwide annual revenue. Google was fined 50 million euros back in January or last year for non-compliance. Let's hear more now from founder Chuck Cameron. Chuck, welcome back.
So Mark, thank you.
Great. So how did you, how did you pivot from, say, legal practice and getting into design privacy?
So about 18 months ago, a client of mine out of Peru who offers services in the US said, Chuck, there's no market opportunity in Europe, but if we're going to take that market opportunity, we have to be GDPR compliant. And it was a no-brainer because my business partner and client, Magnus, was always aware of my leaning towards data privacy and the import that I placed upon it. So it was decided that I would qualify myself as a data protection officer so as to put that company in a position.
And this is you personally?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
As opposed to what?
No, I mean, like, a lot of companies, maybe the company has to be qualified as a data protection company. I don't know, like similar to how, financial companies have to get a license.
So the Peruvian company operating in the US actually sells its services through telcos to end users. So it's actually a Wi-Fi monetization platform that the likes of AT&T and other such companies would use. But that similar opportunity was opening in Europe. So the company needed a data protection officer, and needed to be compliant with the GDPR. So they needed the...
And what's GDPR now?
So GDPR is a regulation that was passed in Europe in 2016, and that really standardized all the data privacy laws across Europe. And it was actually implemented in 2018.
Is it an acronym though for anything in particular?
The General Data Privacy Regulation.
Okay, and why, how does Europe though get involved in, say, Jamaica or the Caribbean? Right? What's the connection here, or what's the synergy?
So the relationship between Europe and Jamaica as it relates to data is really minimal. The objective of the GDPR was really to facilitate trade among the different European states, because every European country had their own privacy regulations. So there'd be different standards that would have to be met if a simple business transaction would take place. Jamaica now and all Caribbean islands, well, not all Caribbean, all countries across the world, if it is you want to do business with Europe, you have to demonstrate that you have systems in place. And when I say systems on a national level, in terms of a strong judicial system that you can resolve commercial issues, a strong constitution that demonstrates that you take privacy seriously.
But give us like an example, Chuck. Like, what's an example of a data between, suppose I'm in Italy and I'm a company in Jamaica. I mean, what's an example of data?
So do you use Google Docs, or do you have an email service?
So let's say email or Google Docs.
So if it is you use any online service provider to store your data or do any sort of processing, you are actually transferring data around Jamaican citizens to a third-party country. And as a result of the passage of our Data Protection Act says that you must ensure that anybody that you give our data to is compliant and meets our privacy standards.
So you're telling me it is, suppose it's a retail, is that only between companies, or is that between even individuals?
So it is Jamaican citizen centric. So this all resolves around the right of privacy of the Jamaican citizen. From the GDPR point of view, it revolves around the right of privacy of the European citizen. So one doesn't care if the data is passing between a company and company or individual and a company. The critical issue is whether or not personal data of a Jamaican citizen is being processed. As long as personal data of a Jamaican citizen is being processed, the law requires you to observe certain data processing standards.
So this is more something that Europe has already done.
Correct.
And so this is something that you're an advocate that you're saying Jamaica should be doing.
So I don't need to be an advocate. In June of this year, the upper house having gone through the lower house, passed our Data Protection Act. It is yet to be gazetted. So this is not something that one is gazetting for, lobbying for.
It has already gone through the door, been approved, but it's awaiting
to be gazetted, to be implemented.
So it's not effective yet.
Correct. All companies or entities that process personal data are compelled to bring themselves under the Data Protection Act and observe certain basic data processing principles.
Is it something, though, where sometimes Jamaican citizens complain about this, where you're going to wake up one morning and hear you have a letter at your office or a letter in the mail that says you owe X amount of fees and you never knew about it?
So it would be bad and not so bad if that was a situation.
But that can't be good because, no. Sometimes Jamaicans feel like that's highway robbery.
No, so you don't need to be concerned about that. If you operate a business, that's not your greatest concern.
Okay.
Your greatest concern should be if one day one of your customers send you an email and say, hey, can I get all the data that you have on me? All the emails, all the phone calls, every time I came, you captured me on your CCTV, and you have 30 days to give that to me. You
mean like the worst case, like what we saw with that's financial houses?
That's not a worst case. That's a
potential case.
That's a data subject exercising his most basic right, and that's his right to access the information, his information.
Okay.
So that's the most standard application of the right. So your concern should be when you cannot deliver, and then you are warned by the supervisory authority, and having failed to deliver, you are now faced with a criminal sanction. So don't worry about a letter that says that you may owe some money. That is the least of the concerns.
From a country standpoint, in Jamaica right now, there's no authority yet that can say, well, like what has happened in Europe and other countries, that there's a fine for this, or like a Wells Fargo case in the US.
So
those type of incidents.
It is contemplated that there will be set up an information commissioner, very similar to the INDICOM that we spoke of earlier, and that they have already gotten a consultant to define the cost and budgeting and all the roles that need to be played. And the legislators have indicated that in the next financial term, the budget would actually be allocated.
Do you have confidence it will have teeth, or will it just be a kind of org chart?
So when you are reading the fines and sanctions that were in place for the European legislation, we have similar sanctions. Our sanctions have gone to the extent where you are faced with criminal sanctions for breach of a data subject right. So when you have criminal sanctions and the possibility of 4% of your gross annual revenue being as a sanction, that to me equates with some serious teeth. And because it is brand new to Jamaica, and if one were to have observed the legislators as it went through Parliament, you would see that they mean business, and they want the commissioner or any supervisory authority to let Jamaicans understand that we take privacy rights seriously, and they intend to enforce the law seriously.
But let's get to brass tacks. If I was whether I'm a regulated entity or unregulated, like the recent incidents that were well published in the media,
yes,
and I'm a financial house and I lose, some or all my data, and all of a sudden I'm a customer, I'm getting text messages from, who knows where, Estonia, all over the world, just sending text messages at midnight. I'm getting inconvenienced, and as you said, there's nowhere to go now. If that company never had safe practices, or if they weren't viewed as having a data protection officer, these are potential ways that now, say, something could be penalized, something could be enforced in the event this is gazetted.
Correct. That the Data Protection Act, in effect, now holds all entities and persons accountable for the use of personal data. And not only do they hold them accountable, they have put the sanction in place to ensure that you're accountable. So the Data Protection Act has done three things. One, it has outlined for you what your privacy rights actually are. Two, it has placed an obligation on persons that use your data, it tells you specifically how to treat that data, set up that supervisory authority, and then also requires you to enable the exercise of those data subject rights by citizens.
So you're saying this is actually a good thing for shareholders of Jamaica. This is a good thing for citizens of Jamaica.
It is a good thing on every level. So earlier you had asked the question, what is the relationship between Jamaica and Europe? If it is we want to play in the international market space and export certain services or attract overseas loans, this will be a prerequisite that we have in place the privacy regime on a national level, and in our individual businesses we can demonstrate the level of data protection for their citizens if it is we're going to be able to do business with them. So our hotel industry, our BPO industry, every industry that you think of that we try to export or do business with outside of Jamaica would be critical going forward in the new regime.
And you were alluding to earlier, like Google Docs.
Correct.
And some of these. Is it like similar to what you see with, when you go into Apple, many other platforms? Is it that if Jamaica gets this right, it's gazetted, then there'll be a pop-up that, reads something and you have to agree or accept these terms of agreement? Is that the objective?
That is the idea. There must be fairness. There must be a lawful and fair processing of data, and part of the fair processing is that it is done with your explicit consent. So it's not just a matter where they force you to press a consent button.
So this is the famous words of opt-in or opt-out?
Correct. And we are moving to a regime where you are required to opt in, not opt out of receiving content. You must actively and knowingly opt in to receiving certain data.
Meaning you have to?
Correct. If it is for the company not to be exposed. So they're not going to say you didn't do anything, and if you want to get out, you have to opt out. That is what the old data privacy regime looked like.
Right.
But in this dispensation, you actually have to actively opt in.
Because if it's gazetted, you have to opt into it.
Correct. Well, it's not because of it being gazetted, it's just how they have framed the operation of the regulation.
Okay. Great, Chuck. That's great. And we take another break on Business Live Extra. We're talking to Chuck Cameron, a man who takes data privacy seriously. More when we return. Welcome back to Business Live Extra. We're talking to Chuck Cameron, founder of Design Privacy. It's a data protection consultancy born out of a need to help Jamaican businesses navigate the new environment. In June, the Data Protection Bill was passed by Senate. It provides guidelines on how the personal data should be collected, processed, stored, used, and disclosed in physical or electronic form. It requires that data should only be obtained on specific lawful purposes with the consent of the individual. The legislation also stipulates that the data must be protected using appropriate technical and organizational measures and be disposed of in accordance with the regulations. The bill further provides that data must not be transferred to a state or territory outside of Jamaica. Let's hear more now with Chuck Cameron. Chuck, we're back with Business Live Extra.
Glad to still be here.
Yeah. So how, we get the privacy side, but how did you come up with the name Design Privacy?
So Design Privacy. So in the GDPR, there's actually a requirement that you design privacy into your systems, especially if building out a new solution. But prior to that, I have really adopted the concept of design thinking. So it is moving away from the traditional way of approaching problems, but really taking a human-centered, multilateral approach to solving problems. So I thought it worked perfectly, and it has gotten some traction in the marketplace. So that's how we came up with Design Privacy.
And you're operational, of course, and you're fully incorporated in Jamaica.
Yes, please. Well, we haven't found the appropriate vehicle that we're going to use as yet. We're still early in the game.
Okay. And what services, you're a consulting firm, but what services do you offer? And just walk us through. I mean, how do you help a company, prepare for this?
So we have seen different means by which we enter the market and how we offer value. So the primary, what we do first and we're actually setting up a different arm, is to sensitize and make people aware through training courses. So that's the first thing. What does the Data Protection Act mean to me and my business? So we put on a series of one-day courses or two-day courses to in-house for companies or just for persons to attend arbitrarily. So that's one aspect of the business. Another aspect of the business is for those companies who are risk-averse and are used to regulation, we actually go in and implement or assist you to implement your data protection compliance program. And when the legislation is actually passed, one of the requirements for most entities is that you must have a data protection officer. We actually offer that service as a service, because the challenge a lot of businesses would face is that where are you supposed to find a data protection officer?
And when you say you offer that service, you'll be like offer a recruiting service, or just to find them and then deploy them, or will you actually offer you'll actually physically put them in the person's office?
No, so we will be your data protection officer.
Okay, because it requires a specific training
and skill set.
And is it a certification as well?
So it is a certification. So I actually went to the UK to get trained as a master data protection officer. But we have a master class. But outside of even any specific training, it does require an in-depth knowledge of the laws in relation to that industry, the information technology and cybersecurity, and of course specific knowledge around the Data Protection Act. And in addition to that, you may want to know how to use project management to implement programs, and have great communication skills with the board, because it must be driven from the top. So it does require a unique skill set.
Yes. No, very interesting. So, and when you mention that, most companies, what does that mean? Are these going to be like, you said earlier, telecom? Is it like financial telecom, government agencies? I mean, if you have a food service company, that probably doesn't need one. But what do you really define as most companies will need this role?
So the legislation says that all data controllers that process large amount of personal data or process sensitive data, or a government agency that processes personal data, must have a data protection officer. Before it reached the Senate, before it reached Parliament, they actually had it that all data controllers, all companies would need data protection officers, but there was some pushback, and it's only those three category of entities. But those three category of entities represent a large amount of Jamaican companies. But let me be very clear, even in that, not because you don't need a data protection officer means that you are not subject to the Data Protection Act. It just means that you don't have to appoint a person by the name of data protection officer.
Who is in-house.
Correct.
Okay.
But you still have to comply. As long as you are processing personal data and making a decision as to how personal data is used, you are still compelled to comply with the Data Protection Act.
I got you. Okay. And do you find that, how do you manage the liability? Will the person actually, will the contract be with your company, or will the person be, hired? A lot of Jamaican companies want a person to work full time for them, but how do you foresee that kind of, coming on stream and being strategic about it?
So the beauty about it is that the legislation removes any liability from the data protection officer, because ultimate responsibility does rest and reside with the data controller. So that's why you hear me.
So the data controller really can't just indemnify themselves and say the onus is on the company.
Correct. So it is when you do your data protection impact assessment, your risk assessment as it relates to your exposure, given the data you process, you may end up having to indemnify the risk or pass the risk off to a third party. If at the end of the day you have decided that, okay, the business is exposed to this risk over here, that type of risk because of this type of data processing, and there's nothing much we can do apart from just indemnify ourselves through insurance. So there is a space for insurance, but that is after you have done everything else that you can do. But the Data Protection Act has opened up an entirely new, different industry, because even a
for Jamaica,
for the world, because GDPR-like regulation is being passed across the world. So it is a new international industry. And I was just making reference to insurance companies that will now be required to, well, there's a business opportunity to offer not necessarily cybersecurity insurance, but insurance against data protection action or suit. So that is another spin-off that presents itself immediately.
Okay, okay. And you mentioned you have 8 staff, right?
Correct.
I mean, what are kind of these staff doing? What's the makeup? And how does the company function right now?
So the 8 staff more speaks to partnerships that we have developed. So we have a core team. That core team is made up of 4 persons, 2 data protection officers, a project type management person, and an admin type person. So what we do on a day-to-day basis is actually implement data protection compliance programs on a day-to-day.
In-house or for your customers?
For customers.
For customers.
For customers.
Like almost like policy manuals that can go to their board of directors.
So that is
and be approved by their boards, or what do you mean?
That is the end result of a compliance program. We actually go in and look at and determine what data do you actually process. Mm-hmm. How does that data move through your business?
So you're also doing like a typical consultant for process flows,
correct,
policy manuals. Are you doing staff training programs as well to sensitize staff?
Correct. The entire gamut. So that's what we do on a day-to-day. So the other team or partners that we have more looking at different industries and more focusing on products. So for example, we have partnered with David Walcott and his partner, Kirk, Novamed, to really look at products and solutions in the medical space, because the whole medical space, there's a big issue as it relates to medical health records and what solutions that are necessary. And we are formalizing partnerships with other entities. So it's really, at this stage, our focus is, having gotten some traction over the past year, how do we go to the next level to meet the anticipated market demand?
How old is the company now?
1 year. Next to 2 weeks makes 1 year.
1 year, okay. So you're 1 year old.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
you go in, you do these, plans, and is that really the main service where you put in a potential staff member or the officer, and you sensitize, you do the policies, and then after that it's about keeping it safe, keeping it world standard? Or? So
you have to interact with your data subjects, and you also communicate with the supervisor authority once it's set up. So on
maybe that might be monthly reporting or quarterly reporting.
Correct. So we see where it would make sense for a company to outsource your data protection officer services for a period of 2 to 3 years. During that 2 to 3 years, we would upskill. We will build out the capacity within your business so you can appoint your own internal data protection officer.
Gotcha.
And following that, we would hope to be able to provide you with the tools necessary to implement it and manage it yourself. Okay. So that's the sort of roadmap we see.
But to be clear, Chuck, you're not like a server business or an IT managed service. No, you're not that. No. You're a data specialized company.
We call ourselves privacy practitioners. So we need to know the language of
that business.
Definitely, inside out, and we need to be able to tear it apart and put it back together.
Perfect.
But we don't offer those services, but it does form part of the ecosystem.
Okay. Thanks, Chuck. And we take another break on Business Dive Extra. We'll hear about how Chuck Cameron is preparing for the future of business in just a moment. Welcome back to Business Dive Extra. We're talking to data protection specialist Chuck Cameron. 2020 has been a difficult year for some. For others, the pace of change caused by COVID-19 pandemic is welcome. It comes as we're in the throes of the 4th industrial revolution, which is basically about applying digital technology to our world to make our lives and work more efficient. Economists and analysts are transfixed on the future of work and jobs of the future. There is some fear and trepidation about the number of jobs and industries that are likely to be lost. Here in the Caribbean, there's great optimism over promising new sustainability and green energy industries. This includes the blue economy, which focuses on ocean resources for economic growth, job creation, and ocean ecosystem health. Let's hear more about what role Chuck Cameron is playing in this new economy now. Chuck, welcome back.
Glad still to be here.
You know, we've had a whole new wave of businesses in Jamaica in the last, couple of years, not just the last 12 months, along this whole theme. We've had, MD Link in telemedicine. We've had, Novamed, which we've actually had on Business Live Extra.
Yeah.
I know we're talking to you,
Yes,
one-year-old company, design privacy, whole new topic. What is this whole kind of digital transition? It's been happening globally for a decade or longer, but it seems like it's really catching steam locally now.
It is, and not by choice, but by necessity. And the government is actually assisting to drive that, because one of the things the Data Protection Act does, it actually compels or forces business to treat their personal data as an asset. And when you treat it as an asset, you are held accountable for it. And once you do that, you can now commoditize it. Because if you're going to treat data as this new commodity, you have to look at what are the features of a commodity. It is something that is predictable, scalable, repeatable, that has consistent processes. And that is all that the Data Protection Act compels you to do. So I see design privacy really assisting companies to create that common language to operate in the digital space. It allows investors to feel comfortable that there are parameters in which these startup companies should operate. It allows startups to say, okay, how do we structure our business? How do we demonstrate that although we're in the digital space, that we do have real structure? The Data Protection Act actually allows for it. So it's important that we move away and quickly get over the fear of the imposition the Data Protection Act is going to place upon us, but quickly embrace it, because it is a tool that can actually drive the fourth industrial revolution in Jamaica. As strange as it sounds, it's an actual tool that can be used to our benefit.
And you have in your firm Design Privacy, you buy fully into this, that this is happening, and money can be made from it, and our traditional businesses will adopt it, and it's gonna happen.
So to borrow some words that have been in the press coming out of our recent elections, we must change or die. So we don't have an option. We can no longer rely on our traditional sources of revenue. If it is we are going to participate in the new global economy, we are now challenged with our tourism industry. Okay, so if we no longer have our tourism industry revenue to rely upon, are we only going to be looking at a BPO? When we talk about the tech revolution, what does that mean? Does it just mean offering remote voice services? No, it is really understanding the essence of data, as ethereal as that may sound, but is how do you commoditize and make money out of and manage your data? That's why we live in the information age. So if you don't capture the basic building blocks of the information age, we will not be able to participate in the information age.
You as a stakeholder, with your company now, Design Privacy, are you happy with the investments poured into the sector, or the speed at which things are happening? Whether it be public sector, private sector, the number of deals you're seeing, or do you think we're still, behind the 8 ball?
I think over the past 4 to 5 years, there has been a drive to explore this new space. But so I am happy with the signals that the government has sent. I'm happy with how the market has responded, with the early investors willing to take certain risk. What needs to happen now is old business now needs to understand that in the same manner in which we used to rely heavily on government interest to create not even wealth but cash flow, We can no longer rely on the old sources of revenue. So we really need to jump in wholeheartedly in it and not just see us trying to survive COVID, but how do we create truly recurring revenues that can generate wealth for us and not just survive COVID, because we have been forced to operate in a different way, in a different space, to transform our businesses. So we should quickly move away from the idea that we're just trying to survive and get through, but really look at what are the business opportunities that we are faced with. How can we leverage our international market space? How can we leverage this new digital space to monetize our culture and what we have to offer? So it is more than just surviving the pandemic, it's really embracing it.
But do you feel though, I mean, even the Prime Minister makes mention of this. I mean, similar to how at the time the Minister of Finance, PM spoke about Wigton, very positively.
Correct.
Jamaica. I mean, both sold like hot bread. Do you feel the government also needs to speak more, whether it's aggressively, positively on this whole digital transformation, not just on JIS, but, as positive sectors? These are the sectors to go into and give more case studies, realities to go into, similar to, you listen to the PSOJ or even the JMEA more so, talking about they want to hear more about manufacturing, more about, agriculture or even agro-processing, going further down. But it seems there's still not clarity on, do we go more into digital, or what sector should we be going into?
There are two things that I think the market should look at. One, not even what the government has said, but what it has done. It has committed to making e-government a reality, and we have gone very far down the road. So a business must look at itself and say, if this archaic bureaucratic machinery can offer its services online, what am I doing as an entrepreneur who is much smaller and much more nimble? So we are forced to engage with the government electronically. That's one. When you look at the cabinet and the recent appointments that have been made, when you look at the Minister of Technology, that has been the most talked about appointment. But one thing that he has said in his defense, and we are aware of, he gets things done. So when we hear about this island-wide Wi-Fi hotspots, I take it as a fait accompli. And the first thing that must happen is that there must be that ecosystem, and there must be connectivity. So once we solve that problem, and then the government has demonstrated how you can offer services on top of that connectivity, the business sector is compelled to follow. So it's not only are they saying that this is where we need to be looking, they are demonstrating how to offer services in that manner, in this space.
Just a question. If the fourth industrial revolution is so important on digital, there are these small ticket sizes, maybe $500,000 or $1 million US.
Right.
I mean, it is big money to you and I, but to overseas investors, it's, eye-cement money. So, tourism blew up, grew very fast,
Correct.
but they had big ticket items, greenfield projects, huge hotels, 20, 50, 100 million US. Is there anything to your knowledge now in this digital transformation, because a private investor can't invest in e-gov? Is there anything that can attract, that the government or the private sector can invest in the digital space in Jamaica?
So this may sound too wide and general, but data. So once we place a value on the data and empower our citizens to own their data, that is what the most value is. When you look at a Facebook is only as valuable as a number of persons they have using their services and the amount of data they have. So it is just to reimagine what we see value in. No more should we be looking for these big white elephants.
And who's the biggest owner of data now?
I don't even think, and that's what I'm saying we should try and avoid. We shouldn't be looking at
But wouldn't the public sector have the largest amount of data now?
Yes, but who owns the data?
I'm asking you.
You own your data, I own my data. So that is a sort of empowerment and knowledge that we need to
So you're saying
understand.
it's not necessarily, I mean, TAJ or tax office or
Because they have our data.
the large, let's say, where we would think, exposures or conduits that have the data now, whether it's, one would assume, which is where you go to for your daily life.
So with privacy rights, you now tell them and control how they use your data. So not because they're sitting on a trove of data mean that they can exploit it. The question is, how do we make our society sophisticated and understand that collectively we have power and it is investable. There's no network. If you look at the rise of TikTok, TikTok, again, all of these new global entities that rule the world, it is only comprised of individual data. So we have to understand how data works and the power of data, because the big shiny objects is not where the value resides. It's really on that network effect and having control over the data. So we have to re-educate ourselves to see where the value is and how we leverage it.
It's a question, Chuck, right?
Yes, sir.
So on your data side, how do you feel that the government will be able to get, or let's say Jamaica will be able to get all of these data hubs to speak together once and for all? Do you think that's something that the country needs, this first and foremost, this data bill to be gazetted, and then that could come after? I mean, we've always grown up hearing about this enterprise-wide system. I know it's a general phrase, but do we need to get there first before we can get the data and then run algorithms to achieve what you're saying?
When you look back at the Tower of Babel and that grand plan that the Egyptians had to build, and I'm not even sure if it came out of Egypt, but when they wanted to build this grand pyramid in honor of Babel, the challenge that they had was that they all spoke different languages and they couldn't communicate. It's the same thing with data. We all need the same common language and the data sets in a common format to be shared over common platforms. And that is what gives rise to the value. The ability to quickly, easily share data between different silos. That is what gives rise to the value. The ability to share data and keeping it in a common format, and we speak in a common language. That is a value, and that is what part of what the Data Protection Act does. So Microsoft has aggressively gotten into this space, and that's where Microsoft is paying specific attention. They are looking at industry by industry and creating a set of common languages for the medical industry, for the legal industry, for the insurance industry, because it's only when we're all speaking the same language and you have the same legislation.
So can your firm, besides the officers, the policies, can you help drive this integration for the country?
Definitely, and the legislation contemplates that. The legislation contemplates industries presenting themselves before Parliament and saying, hey, this is a construct of how we see data being treated in our industry that works for us above and beyond what's in the legislation. And yes, we are seeking to empower individual companies in these industries and at times taking industry leads to sort of create this common position that we hope will drive Jamaica forward.
Chuck, before we close, do we see NIDS in 2021?
Don't be surprised if we see it in 2020.
Chuck, it's great having you.
Oh, my pleasure.
On Business Live.
Yes,
appreciate it. That's it for another edition of Business Live Extra. Remember, business has only two functions: marketing and innovation. We've been talking to Chuck Cameron, founder of Design Privacy and expert in the field data protection. Don't forget, you can watch us online at cvmtv.com/business. Thanks for joining us.